All right, so today we're going to work on the next, our first real assignment, which is going to be a stick animation. So if you haven't done this already, copy your preferences into the correct folder. If you don't know what I'm talking about, I'm going to do it up here. So I'm going to go to my P drive, I'm going to Maya, and I'm deleting the 2016.5 folder. Bless you. I'm going to my folder for 2540, and I'm copying the 2016.5. So you can right click and copy it, or you can control drag it into that folder. And then you can boot up Maya. For this specific assignment, you're going to need a file. Y drive. On the Y drive in 2540, I have this file folder called your name _ animated stick. So you're going to copy that file folder and you're going to paste it into your 2540 work folder. And then obviously you would change the name. Instead of your name, you would put in your last name. Cool. I'll make a thing. All right, so while we're waiting for everyone to get theirs into the correct spot, yes. All right, so I'm going to set my project. So I go to File, Set Project. I find my stuff here, Sarcona Animated Stick, and I'm going to open it up. Okay, so just to give you an overview of what it is that we have, this is just, it's cubes and cylinders that I've rigged up to be animated. Okay, now if I tried to grab any of the stuff in here that I don't want to actually move, you'll see that I can't grab any of this. I can't grab the platform. I can't grab the background. I can't even grab the little locator. The only thing I can grab in here is a stuff that is bright green, which are my controlling objects. As an animator, we want to be able to animate pretty much anything inside of our scene. But for some of these things, when we rig it, we want to limit what can actually be animated so we don't screw something up and move something away. So for instance, let's say I undid this stuff here, and I accidentally did that. Okay? I accidentally moved the platform away from the top of this. That could cause some issues because now my other stuff isn't going to work correctly. Okay? So what I did is I put my stuff on layers that lock the ability for me to even be able to move any of those things. So all of my geometry is on a layer. I can't touch it. I can't move it. It's perfect. I don't want to accidentally move it away from where it's at. It's exactly where it needs to be. The only thing that I want to be able to move are these specific things. Now you'll even see that these are limited too. I can't grab these little curves and move them at all. Okay, their move is locked. That's what these gray things mean. The only thing I can do with these is rotate. And I can only rotate it in one direction. Just like the band. I can't rotate it this way. I can't rotate it that way. I can't scale it at all. I can only rotate it in the one direction that I want it to move. Okay? So when we rig anything, when we set something up to be animated, that's what we want to keep in mind. Is we want to lock certain things that we don't ever want someone to accidentally move. When you animate something, you may look at it from the front view, and it may look perfect from the front view. Then you switch to a perspective or you switch to a side view, and the thing is going like crazy because it's rotating in different directions. It's actually moved away from where it needs to be, or whatever. Okay? So, we'll get into more of how to create all of these kinds of things, but all of these were just done in Illustrator. Okay? I literally just drew a circle in Illustrator, put some arrows on it, and then made it a shape and brought it into Maya. That's all those ones are. Okay, and then I just lined it up with where these are at, and that's it.
Right, you made a circle.
A circle inside of Illustrator. That way I could like cut it, and then I would have arrowheads on the ends of the stroke.
I see what you mean.
Convert that to an outline, and then Pathfinder to make it all one. All right, so now the same thing here. I can only move this left and right. I can't move it, rotate it, or scale it any other direction except for the intended direction, which is just left and right. If this moved in the Z direction, there would be no point because these things aren't allowed to rotate in that direction. So that would be a different kind of animation, different kind of rig setup. Okay. Now let's go through what the scene entails. So we have this guy here on the left that we can animate and move around. Then we have a little plus sign on the right. That's a locator. The locator is our target. Okay. So what we're going to be doing is this is going to be kind of off screen. This is going to animate in, stop about here, wait a second, and then animate out. Okay. Now in order for all of this to look nice, we have to animate those little tendrils, that's why they're there, kind of swaying too. So as it moves one way. When it stops, it kind of sways a little bit, and then when it takes off, it moves again. Okay? Should be not pretty easy, but good enough for our first project. Yes, ma'am.
In like Cinema 4D, isn't there just like you can just like apply dynamics to it and then you just remove it and it automatically does it?
Correct. Even in Maya, we could do that too. We could set it up inside Maya so that when that top piece moves, the rest moves too. The problem is though is that we lose control of it. We lose the ability to manipulate each one of those things afterward. Okay? So even when we do like a bouncing ball, we definitely could do a bouncing ball, but we don't have the same control otherwise. Okay? There actually was a guy who was developing a plugin which would basically look at your animation of a character walking, and he would give them a physical walking dynamic ability to walk. So basically you just kind of say go forward, and the character tries to just stay up, and they move up, and he's like, now I need you to jump, and he physically tries to exert himself to jump upwards. And based on different parameters, you could have him do this kind of stuff. But you don't have the control then.
Where can you get such a thing?
What?
Where can you get such a thing?
It was in development. I'll find it. All right, so here's what we're going to do. Let's start up this animation by animating this thing going to that. If you remember last time, we went into our animation preferences. And in the preferences, we had to specify we're dealing with 30 frames a second before we did anything. We have to do that again. So next to, or where the little running guy is with the gear, we're going to click on that. Okay. Right now we're set to real time 24 frames a second. All right, so our playback speed is set to real time 24. We need to go to the settings and change our timestamp to NTSC 30. Okay, so go up to settings, change your timestamp to 30. And the reason we're doing it at 30 is because it gives us an extra 6 frames per second. That way we have a little bit more time to kind of tweak stuff. If we went like 80 frames a second, we would have a whole lot of time to get in there and really tweak what this thing is doing. If you are really limited and you have 5 frames, you have no time at all, no frames at all to animate a nice little swing. Okay, it's cool. So now we'll hit save. There we go. Our time slider is defaulting to 1.25 because when it goes from 24 to 30, it does that. So we just reset this to 1 and then rewind. Okay, so both of these numbers are set to 1. We rewind, so this is at 1. Okay, good so far? All right. So now we're going to set keys on our stick. Okay, so at frame 1, the main body controller, which is this top arrow, okay, the very top piece of this should be at 0. So if you look in the channel box, that's set to 0, the translate X. Once it is, hit S. Okay, So we've set a key on that translate X to set our... We're starting off here at the origin. We're going to go up to some amount. We're not sure yet. We're going to animate this to come over to this side. It'll stay there for a few frames, and then it'll come back. Okay? That's all it's going to do. So let's go up, let's say 60 frames. So we're going to go to frame 60. We're going to slide him over to about where the crosshair is. Doesn't have to be exactly on it. And then we'll hit S. Okay? S will set your key for that. Now we have to give the sway of the arm a little bit of time to stop swaying. So when this thing moves in, that arm is just going to be kind of dangling for a few frames, and then eventually it's going to stop. Once it completely stops, then we're going to move it over and animate going the other way. So let's say at 110 is when we're going to start moving again. So right here at 110, I'm going to set another key. Okay, so I go to 110, I hit S to set another key, and now he's there. Then I'm going to go up to 150. I'm going to slide him back to the origin and set another key. Okay, so we should have 4 keyframes set. We should have one at the beginning where he's at the origin, one at 50 where he's on the crosshair, one at 110 when he's at the crosshair, and one at 150 when he's back at the origin. If we hit the play button, we should see he goes over, he stays, he comes back. Alright, so that's where we're at so far. So now what we want to do before we move any further is we want to work on the timing of this thing going from one side to the other side. If you go too far ahead and we tried to animate the tendril thing now, what would happen is we get the tendril looking good, but then we realize we need to speed up or slow down this arm going back and forth, and that would kind of screw things up. Okay? So one thing I want to do is working on the speed of this. If we watch it for a second, you can see that it just looks kind of boring. Like it's just kind of like moving in, stopping, and then moving out. What would be neat is if it kind of picked up speed really quick and then slowed down shortly before the end of it, you know, and kind of stopped. That would give us a nice little whip right on our thing. If this moves too slow, just as an example, okay, this is moving this slow, there's no way that these tendrils here would whip up that fast, right? If it's moving super slow, it wouldn't go up that high. It might go like this high, but it would never go up that high. So we want to give it a little bit more speed to it, okay? So using your shelf thing here, we can go to the graph editor. So you have to hit stop on your playback and then go to the graph editor. If you don't have it in the shelf, you can go to Window, Animation Editor, Graph Editor to get that. And then I'm just going to hit F to frame that out. Okay? So we should see in here something that looks very similar to my graph. Now what this is doing is it is slow at the beginning. So right here, it's kind of picking up speed right at the very beginning. And right at the very end, it's kind of slowing down right before it gets there. But I want to make it a lot more. I want this thing to basically just like shoot over there and then slow down. Okay? So the way we can do this is kind of like what we did with the ball animation last week. Okay? So I'm just going to click on it, grab any part of the curve so it highlights the entire thing. Okay, so I'm not going to grab one point, I'm going to grab the curve, and that grabs everything. I'm going to go to curves and say weighted tangents. And then I'm going to go to tangents and say free tangent weight. Okay, now remember what this does. It allows me to manipulate those handlebars so I can stretch them out or bring them close in. I'm going to make this bigger so I can see it better. Okay, so here's what I want this to look like, because I want this area here to be very quick. So if I take this and I pull it over like this, what we should get is something that starts off pretty slow and then ramps up really fast. We had to make sure we went to curves weighted and then tangents free, and that allows us to pull it. Now I need to do the same thing here. I'm going to grab this one and just bring it in. All right, so now what that motion should do is here, because this is pretty narrow at the beginning, pretty short, that motion at the beginning should go very slow. Like he's basically crawling, then all of a sudden he zips up. Now the idea is that we wouldn't see the pickup. We wouldn't see him starting off because he's off frame, okay? So just look at mine for a second just so you can see it. He would be like this. We wouldn't see anything, and then he would just kind of like whip into frame. All right, so if I rewind it and hit play, all right, so you see how he just kind of moves into frame like that, okay? Now that still may be a little bit too slow for what we're doing. Let me see it again. Yeah, that might be a little bit too slow. I may need to adjust that a little bit, but we'll see. All right, so now at the end, I want very similar thing to happen where at the end he goes a bit quick at the end and eventually slows down, okay? So I'm going to do the same thing here. Whoops. One thing to be aware of, if I left click too close to a handlebar, it'll start to drag the handlebar around. So you have to be like kind of far away before you marquee something, okay? So I'm going to hold shift, drag that in, go here, drag this out like that. Okay, so basically have this like weird shape inside here. And that should give us something that looks pretty decent. Zips in. Alright, so now let's say we needed to tweak a little bit of the timing on this. Let's say that it's still going a little bit too slow at the beginning. Maybe a little bit too slow at the end still, because we really want this thing to whip inside there so that we can do some nay-nay on it, okay? Couple. There we go. Making sure everyone's paying attention. All right, so we can close or hide the graph editor. Now we want to pull up our dope sheet. So your shelf has a dope sheet, so you can click that, or Window Animation Editor's dope sheet has the dope sheet. Okay, so if you remember from last week, this shows us all the keyframes that we currently have. The first one, sometimes it locks the first one and doesn't let us edit it, or it signifies it in gray. Pretty much if it's not always reliable, okay? Sometimes it'll show that it's not moving when in fact it is moving, okay? Just be aware there's not a perfect system inside here. We don't care about the first one though, because we care about these three. So the first one stays where he's at. The other three I need to nudge over. So I'm going to make sure I marquee all three of these and middle drag it maybe to 45. Okay, so there's 45 on the bottom. I drug that line so it's lined up with about 45. I'm also going to grab this last one here and drag this to be lined up with, let's say 124.5-ish, just about there. These don't have to be precise. If you're a frame or two or three off from mine, it's not going to be a huge deal. It's just a matter of being able to look at what your animation is doing and tweak it from there. Okay, so I put my first keyframe is about 45, if I look down here. My second keyframe is about 95. And my last keyframe is about 125. I could even type in the values right up at the top. Stuff. So if I were to marquee in the center of this, you'll see that it's not selecting it every time. Like right there, it's not selecting it. However, if I go right here, it is selecting it. Right? You can see how I'm marking right in the center, it grabs it. Right down here, it doesn't. So the best bet is just to marquee a box over the keyframe itself. Okay? These are little nuances that eventually you'll get used to and just accept that that's how life is. Okay? So if we look at the animation now, Okay, it looks much more dynamic. We get much more push inside there. Do you remember from the video that we watched last week about the 12 principles of animation? There was one about exaggeration, and they're like, if you don't know how far to exaggerate it, go past that point and then dial it back, right? So this is the same kind of thing. You can always push something further and further and further, and then just see, okay, this is way too far, and then you know to start dialing it back. So if at this point you're like, okay, I've gone too far, I need to tweak some stuff, then you can. But I think right here, I'm actually happy with the way that's looking. Okay. And then if I look at my graph editor, you'll see that nothing's really changed inside here. We didn't do a whole lot of tweaking on this. If I were to, just so you can see it, if I were to have really gotten this tweaked, sometimes this graph will actually like come underneath and then zip back up. Just because of how those tangents are playing with each other, it'll create some weird patterns, and you just have to go back in the graph editor and fix it. It didn't do it this time, which we are just fortunate that it didn't do it. Okay, or if I just move this, you'll see we'll get some really like interesting things if I go past that. All right, so those two should be good. So now I'm going to save this as, and I'll put Sarcona underscore stickrig underscore 01. Okay, so I put my name and then a 01 at the end. Yes, sir. My stuff broke.
You recorded this, right?
Yes. Did anyone else's stuff break or just mine?
Your stuff broke.
It didn't break. Yeah, there we go. Somehow my viewport here, switching my viewport, it broke it, but then I just switched it from legacy and then back to viewport, and then it was fine. So it's just a wonderful glitch that we can just point out as a Maya fun thing. All right. Okay, cool. All right, so now that we have this arm going across, coming back, now what we can do is animate the bottom piece doing the same thing, okay, an appropriate amount. So if we go in here, something to pay attention to. If I grab this here, do you see how all of those have highlighted in green, right? If I rotate from this point, I'm just going to go to this and then use default material. Good. If I rotate from this point, you'll see what happens here is that it keeps it in a straight line. Okay? If I grab this one, shift click this one, shift click this one, shift click this one, shift click that one, and then rotate, you'll see that my pivot is still up here, but when I rotate this, it's rotating like a tail would. Okay? And the reason for that is just how this thing is rigged. So when we animate this part, we have to grab all 5 of these arrows. Now you can do it just by marqueing them. So if I just marquee all 5 arrows, it'll let me do that. So just make sure you're getting the same result. Okay? So we have to look at where our keyframes are. So I'm going to grab all 5 of my arrows. I'm going to make sure I'm on frame 1, and I'm going to hit S to set my key. Okay, so I grabbed all 5 arrows, went back to frame 1. Everything is back to being zeroed out, so there's no rotation here. And then I hit S to set my key. Then I'm going to advance my time until I get to the spot where it stops moving. In this case, it's about 45. Okay? At 45, I'm going to rotate this up. And then set a key. Okay, so this is a start of it, okay? What we're going to do is not the end. We have to tweak and tweak and tweak until this thing looks super awesome. So now what we need to do is what's going to happen once this thing stops? Right, it's going to flip the other way, right? Momentum's going to swing it around, and it's going to go that way. So what we're going to do is go, let's see, it's about 95 is when mine starts moving. I'm going to go to, let's say, frame 55, which is 10 frames later, and I'm going to rotate it around the other direction. Now, let me hit undo for a second. Look at the number that I have for my rotate Z. It's roughly -30. So how far should it go the other way?
25.
25. Something less than that value. Okay? It should never go higher than it. It shouldn't go to like 30 or 40 or 50. The momentum wouldn't make it fly further. So we would go to, let's say, 25 or so. Okay? And then I set a key. Now watch what I do here, and then you can set yours. So I went 10 frames here. I'm going to go less frames on the next one. So maybe I go 8 frames or so. And then I swing it back less the other way. So I went from -29 to +25 to -15. And then to, let's say, +8. To, swing it around the other way a little bit, to that, and then to that, and then to, okay? So I did 2 things here. One, every time that it went to the other side, the number is smaller than the previous number, okay? One side's going to be negative, one side's going to be positive. So just pay attention to that. The other thing I did is each gap, each distance between the keyframes got smaller and smaller and smaller. Now you could go through and figure out this is 10, this is 8, this is 7, this is 4. Just look at the size. This is obviously bigger than this, and this is bigger than that, and so on. We can adjust it later. So go through until you get back to being rotated to 0. Alright, so obviously this is doing something very weird at the beginning. Before he's even picked up some speed, that that arm is basically pivoted back, and it shouldn't be, right? It shouldn't be lifting up until there's actually some sort of momentum driving this thing forward, okay? So we'll fix that in the dope sheet / graph editor. We can tweak all that stuff. We want to, again, just kind of go through, set up our main keys, and then we can come back and tweak things. So now that this thing is kind of coming to rest, we need to do something very similar that we just did. We need to go to where it starts moving again. For mine, I believe is at 95. So I'm going to go to frame 95, and I set a key on them. Then I go to its extreme, which is, I believe, 125, and rotate it back. Okay. Now with this side, we're not going to see anything past this. So our stick comes into frame, does its little wave, and then goes out of frame. So we're never actually going to see the end wiggle, so we don't need to add those extra wiggles in there. All right, so now that we have this, it's time to clean it up a bit, because what we have is, it's like we said, it's starting a little bit too soon in how it bends backwards, right? So this actually shouldn't start to fly up until, let's say here, until 25 on mine, okay? Until it hits 25, then it just zips across pretty much, okay? I could also give it a little bit of taper. We also have this where it stops, and then there's a good 18 frames or so where it's just sitting there doing nothing. It's kind of boring to sit there and do nothing. I want to have some sort of pause right here, but 18 frames is basically someone's going to look at that and think the animation is over. All right? So we need to tidy that up too. So when we're looking at specific timing issues where I need to edit keyframe placement, I use the dope sheet. Okay? So that's what I want to use as the dope sheet. Now here, because we have 5 items in our scene, you'll see that I have 5 different graphs right there. we also have this top blue line. The top blue line allows us to grab everything that's in that list. Okay? So instead of me doing this, where I marquee straight down and grab all of these, I could just marquee the blue line. I lied. Come on. There we go. I don't know, it wants both of those. Why do you want both? Alright, I'm just going to grab down here, whatever. So I'm going to grab down there, and then I could adjust it. Now I need, inside of the dope sheet, I also need the animation for the thing going back and forth. Okay? The little stick, because I need to adjust that as well. So I'm going to grab my stick plus the 5 things, and that gives me all 6 items inside here. Okay? That way I have everything that's animated inside my dope sheet, so I can adjust the timing of that center area. So then I can just grab those 2 on the end and middle drag it back. Okay? So this gives me my animation, a short pause right here in the middle, and then the rest of my animation. Okay? You may not need that. I needed it because I had a lot of room there. Everyone's scene is going to be different. And then let me see what I want to do about that transition at the beginning. Okay, I'm going to go to my graph editor and just take a look at this. I think that might be a little bit too drastic here. There we go. Okay. So here's what I ended up doing to fix the timing of the little tentacle pieces on the bottom. I went in the graph editor and I did that same trick with the weighted tangents and the free tangent weight so that I could grab the handlebar here and force it to be really shallow at the start and then kind of ramp up to that other point. There it goes. And I'll do the same thing on the end of this. Now, one thing you may need to do, look at this handle here. I can't adjust this handle any further. I want this here to be tighter. I want that to basically just like go. If I move it, you'll see that it's going to adjust this side too, and I don't want that to happen. So what I can do is one of these guys, where'd you go? Right here. This is breaking the tangents. So just like if you were drawing with the pen tool, you could break the tangents and do one thing with one side while the other one doesn't do anything. That's what that's going to do. So now I can grab this and scoot that over. Okay, so now, that should be good. Just pull that back a little bit more. Still think I want that to come up more. I think I'm just going to rotate this even further. There we go. Like I said, it's not even going to be in the scene, so we don't need to see it. Basically rolling around. There we go. Okay. Alright, so it looks like for the most part we all got that part done. Alright. So now what else could we add to this to make it appear more attractive or more realistic? Yes, ma'am.
Smoothing out the curves, like I had to do that with mine for when it's swaying back and forth because it was too jaggedy. So I smoothed them out to make it look more fluid.
Mm-hmm. You can smooth them out a little bit. Anything else? Any other ideas?
Colors?
Not yet. Okay. One thing that's going to really help is thinking of the physics of this. If this top platform starts moving, what's the first object that's going to move after it?
The very top of the links.
This one, right? And then which one's going to move second?
One below it, and then the one below it, and so on.
Right. So there's a chain reaction, no pun intended, that's going to happen to these things. It's not just everything's going to move at once and everything's going to rotate at once. Even though we're doing this and everything's kind of rotating and it looks cool, we're losing a little bit of the realism of it because we don't have just this extra bit of offset that's in there, okay? So right now everything is in sync. Remember they talked about twinning, where everything that happens on the left happens on the right? This is something very similar, where everything that rotates all together, okay? So I'm going to close my graph editor, and I'm going to go to the dope sheet. You're already open. There you are. And look how simple this is. Number 1 is on top, if I label this correctly. Yes, okay. So number 1 is on top. I have these in order 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So if I go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, just to verify they're in the right order. And what I want to do is number 1 should happen first, then number 2, then number 3, then number 4, then number 5. So watch how easy it is to offset. I'm going to go to number 2, go to the move tool, and just in here, middle click and drag like 2 frames over. Okay, and I can zoom in just to verify it. Go to number 3, middle click and drag. Go to number 4, maybe I'll only do 1 frame offset there. Number 5, maybe a 1 frame offset there. So you see how there's 2 frames between these two? 2 frames here, 1 frame and 1 frame. Now watch what happens here. Do you see how much more lifelike that wiggle happens? How nicer that looks just based on just offsetting these keyframes so they're all not doing the exact same thing. Okay, so we offset each one of these times, right? So instead of them all being rotating the same exact amount at the same exact time, now they're rotating the same amount, but they're offset by a frame or 2, okay? So the next thing we could do, any ideas what else we could do to this? We varied the time of each one of these, right? What else could we vary? The curve, right? Because all these curves are rotating the exact same amount, and they wouldn't. When this thing moves from left to right, we have a whole lot of momentum, a whole lot of pull here, so that first one is going to get a lot of rotation. The next one, not as much. The next one, not as much. The next one, not as much. Okay? So watch what I do in the graph editor. I'm not even looking at my animation. I'm just looking at my graph editor. And I know these things here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 are still here. This really doesn't matter so much. When I look at my points, each one of these points is in order. This is, come on. The first one is 1, then 2, then 3, then 4, then 5. When I get over here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. When I get all the way over here, it's going to get confusing for sure. But all these other ones, it's pretty obvious which one 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 is because it's literally right in order. Okay? So what should happen is anytime we've gone away from 0, 1 should be the furthest, which is that one. 2 should be further down. 3 should be further down. 4 should be further down. And 5 should be furthest down. Okay? Because each one has less momentum, less rotation because of where they're at in the chain. Now, one thing I don't want to do is get in the habit of moving these away left and right because that'll screw up what we just did. So one little trick over here is this guy. The far right top area, do you see where there's a little plus sign with arrows that says unconstrained drag? It's basically we can lock it in to only move left and right or only move up and down. In this case, we only want to move up and down, so I just click it until I get the thing that looks like just up and down. And then I just go to each one of these and middle drag and just offset each one. So number 1 stays the same, and 2, 3, 4, and 5 just get closer to that 0 line. And then when we get to the very end of this, you can just kind of like leave it where it's at. Everything's just so close anyway. All right, so we could keep tweaking this pretty much, you know, every single bit. Realistically, as we're doing this, we want to go through and do more refinement to these things, you know, especially if this is a piece that's going to be used in production for our demo reel, for something commercial we're going to get paid for. Even going so far as to maybe come into the middle of this and maybe set some more keyframes just to really emphasize how far up this one is. Or here at the end. You know, as it's coming this way, why not just go here and just kind of crank it up right at the beginning? That way we're getting the animation we want without trying to force it through the graph editor and it's not looking very good. I definitely want to tweak that because I don't like how long this is taking and how straight that is. When we animate this, or when we render it out, this is the framing for it. So we're not even going to see this thing. Oops. Let me zoom back out a little bit more. So we're not even going to see it until it gets here. And then by the time it goes off screen, we're basically not, it's gone. You know, by the time it actually curls up to a point where it's decent. Okay, so I definitely want to tweak that a bit more to get this to look finished. But for our first one, it's pretty good. Now, a couple other things that we'll have to keep in mind as we get further on with any of our assignments is eventually we'll have to consider the rendering stuff. When we render these things, I'm going to go into more detail with this next week or next class. But we have motion blur, okay? So just so you can see what this is going to look like now. All right, so there it is, pretty crystal clear. When we start to add things like motion blur, that's really going to enhance the look of this, but it could also detract from it because we've lost it, right? So then we'll have to start playing with our settings in order to get good results so we don't like lose our entire animation here. There we go. Okay. So again, that's more stuff that we'll end up playing with when we get closer to actual rendering time of this. Okay, so it comes in, woo, wiggles, and then zips out of frame. Okay. Now, if we decided to, like, ooh, I want to edit some of this. I don't like the timing. I don't like whatever it is. Okay. And we want to undo all the stuff that we did for our dope sheet. Look how easy it is to just grab the stuff that's in there. Oh, you're already open over here. And just go back to here and just scoot these back in alignment. And now everything's back on top of each other. Then we could do any adjustments we need to and then go back and tweak other stuff. Even in the graph editor, here's all of our stuff here. If we needed these to be back to a certain value, we can grab them and then just say, you know, the toppest one is 25, so I'll set it to 25. Toppest. And then this is the bottomest one, and that's negative 30. Okay, so very quickly we can get in here and start to tweak this to get it back to where it was before we made any changes, in case there are changes that we need to tweak on this. If we don't like the timing of something, we don't like whatever, we can always come back and just quickly reset it. And as quickly as you reset it, you can quickly go through and start to tweak it some more. 70. Okay, so now this is back before I did any dope sheet, before I did any graph editor. I can tweak whatever I need to tweak and go from there. Now, one thing I want to kind of point out with this is this curve. So look at the extent of the curve. Remember when we said we set some keyframes and we wanted to go, I think it was -30 on one direction and then negative and then +25 and so on. Your curve should represent that kind of thing. So when I first animation we had 0 and then we rotated it out this far and then it went up to here, then it went here, then there, then there. Look at how it progressively gets from height-wise, it gets shorter and shorter and shorter in towards this area here where we're back to 0. Also, the distance between these 2 points gets less and less and less each time. Oops. Okay? So that's going to be a common reoccurrence. Every time we animate something, we need to look at the graph to make sure that what we're seeing or what we imagine should be happening actually is happening. And the graph editor is a good way to be able to see that kind of thing happening. Okay? A couple other tools that could be handy in our troubleshooting. One of them is called ghosting. So if I go to, I believe it's under animation, and it's under visualized, I can say ghost selected. Okay, and in here I'm going to grab these things. And I'm going to say, let's do custom frame steps. We'll do, I don't know, 6 before, 6 after, and a step of size of 2. There we go. Okay. Now, because I had these selected, and I should have realized this beforehand, that it did those. So I'm just going to unghost that because that doesn't help me out at all. Unghost all. Let me go to my outliner. And I'm going to click the main object. Let me see if I can do it just to that. Ghost selected, same settings. There we go. Okay, so I grabbed the main object in here. And what ghosting is going to allow me to do is see how the animation is playing out. So it's kind of like a lowered resolution as a faded resolution. So as I rewind this and hit play, I can see what it's doing before and after the current frame. So it just gives you a good idea of what the animation is going through. It may not be something you want to do all the time, but it definitely does help sometimes. I think 6 both ways is a little bit too much. Let me do 0 after and 6 before. That might be a little bit more helpful.
Can you render it out like ghosting?
You can't. But what you can do is in After Effects, you can do it inside of there. Okay, so now you can see here is, 2 frames before this. I can see what it's doing. Sometimes you'll get a little glitch. Maybe one of the legs just like twitches for 1 frame and you just can't nail it down of where it's happening. This is a good way to kind of diagnose some of that stuff. Especially when you get into a full-blown character, so many things are going on, it's hard to see. All right. Sometimes too we want to isolate just certain features. Like let's say I just wanted to look at the legs of this and watch the tentacle or the whatever it is, just swing back and forth, but not have this move back and forth. So if I click on this and go to the Translate X, I can right click and I can say mute. Where are you at? There you are. Mute selected. This turns it from red into this like tan color, and that means don't move. So now when I rewind this and hit play, it's 6. Oh, because I have this still on. Turn that off. There we go. What? Let's taking this back to this.
I think you muted the
there we go.
controller.
No, it's just the viewport. Okay. So now what it's doing is it's only showing me what that specific thing is doing. So I can really isolate if there's an issue with the arm, I can look at that. Okay. So that's called muting. Ghosting allows us to see kind of like a lower opacity version of the stuff before and after, and muting literally just kind of turns it off. And then I right click and say unmute selected, and then it pops it back in so that our animation will play back out again. Okay, cool. All right, so I'm going to save this, and that's it. All right, So now what you're going to do is, we've done this one together. Now you're going to do it again from scratch by yourself. Okay? So this process is going to be used over and over and over again. Everything we've done for this, setting keyframes, using the dope sheet, using the graph editor, adjusting curves, timing things out, looking at it, analyzing it, whatever, we're going to do that every single assignment of this class. Okay? So you need to be comfortable with it. So we've done this together. So now you're just going to do this again. So your next one should take less time to do because you know how to do the stuff. And it should be better because you know where the troubled areas are going to be and how to correct them. Okay? So by the end of next class, you should have this thing reanimated. And I'm going to go over next class how to do the texturing and shading on assignment like this, and the camera setup and the rendering. Okay?